Welcome to the Jon Myer Podcast, where we bring you thought leadership and conversations from around the world. Today's topic, real-time reconciliation and fraud prevention, and what is the future of enterprise payment processing? Joining us today is Christopher Belford, who is the Senior Director at EPI-USE Services for AWS. Christopher, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, John. Pleasure to be here.
Christopher, today we're talking about business problem with ERP, enterprise resource planning systems, and when it comes time to real-time reconciliation and fraud prevention. Could you walk us through what the typical or traditional enterprise payment processing system looks like?
Yeah, sure. I think the important thing here is certainly in the enterprise is to understand that we're dealing with two separate worlds. And so on the payment side, we're talking about banking institutions, payment processors, and typically organizations that have fiduciary licensing and other things in order to accept payments on behalf of their enterprise clients. And on the other side, we have the enterprise who are running, and selling goods and services and are trying to account for that in their core ERP system. And really, in the landscape today, there's very little that glues this processing world with what's going on inside the ERP. And so I think if we want to talk about the landscape in general, really, uh, you know, regardless of the industry, and it's an important thing. Payments transcend multiple different industries, and so suffice to say, any entity that's engaged in high volume digital payment acceptance or high volume outbound payments to their suppliers and vendors are going to sit with a similar problem in terms of gluing these two worlds together. And so the typical enterprise landscape, and so like I say, whether it's public sector and we're taking payments for permits and parking permits and fines, citizen services, eventing, et cetera, or if it's a utility, so water payments, gas, electricity, sewage, garbage, et cetera, or in the commercial world, and really one that's atypical, e-commerce. And so where you're glued together with your payment processor, your logistics, your warehousing and distribution, and really being able to pull all of that together, that it works as a seamless payment orchestration, and that the business works as intended. And so in that landscape, kind of up at the front, you have a bunch of different payment channels. These have been modernized over time, but really the underlying rails have by and large remained the same, over the last decade. But up at the front, we see a variety of these different channels, mobile, over the phone, IVR, web application, over email, checks in the mail, in a call center when dealing with a CSR, or over the counter at a field office. And really, the challenge begins there, because coming or originating out of those payment channels, all of these payments are being driven down into line of business systems, which makes sense because each line of business system is servicing is a particular good or service that's associated with that payment. And then we have to glue all of this together, and really have a cross-channel, a transactional layer, if you like, that connects all of these systems together with our core ERP, or in this case, SAP financial management.
Christopher, when I look at it, and when we talk about real time, there are a number of cases where, let's just say, digital companies who are startups, people who are out there just recently, are doing things real time and processing real time. And while it looks real time on the surface, behind the scenes, there's another layer that goes to it where your bank, it's not traditionally real time and it's being processed a little bit later or slower. Huge enterprises that have well-established ERP systems are, while they look real time on the front end, the back end is not the same. With all the technology available today, why are some still doing it manually? And what are some of the problems with this manual processing?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So, real time or near real time in a payment processing world doesn't exist. It appears real time to us as users, but actually, the processing that's going on in the back end is not real time at all. So,
You mean, Christopher, when I see on my bank statement or I open up the app, it says pending. Is that real time or is that near real time or not really real time?
it's not really real time at all. So the look, by and large, if we use so first of all, there's many instruments in this landscape. You know, are you paying with a credit card? Is it a wire? Is it an ACH payment? Is it a check? You know, what is the payment instrument that we're using? But if we took card as an example, the typical processing that's going on is you're on a web application, you're paying for something, you're buying something. The application takes the payment, it sends that instruction off to the payment processor that'll do, by and large, a real-time authorization. But that authorization then needs to be captured, then batched. It's then processed at day end. Then there's a settlement or an interbank a settlement. And typically, what we would say is like time plus one or time plus two. The funding part is then moved to the enterprise that is that is originating the payment, or the merchant, if you like. What's important here is that can't stop business. So if you've paid for something, you want it delivered, or if you've paid for a service, you want that service, as soon as possible. And so we need to have, or at least be able to have eyes on where that transaction is in the general process. And what that can mean is I have to release the goods to you before I have the actual money in my bank account. I can't wait a day or 2 days for the settlement to happen. And so to your question, why is real time important in this space? It's important, one, that I have eyes on where the revenue is so I can service my customers better. And that means a transactional bridge between what's going on in the banking world and the payment processing world and what's going on in my ERP. And so I've got an eyes on at every step in that transaction. But when and really that's facilitating, goods and service and good customer service. But it doesn't end there. At the end of the day, or at day end for the enterprise, I've got all of these merchant accounts that now have to be reconciled in terms of what went on, during that day. And in order to do that in an automated fashion, I need to have this transactional bridge. So typically, and to your point about manual processes, what goes on out in the wild in terms of the enterprise is the banks and the processors generally don't do what we would call the last mile. So, meaning that they'll process the transaction for you and they will account for it. They will do all of that good stuff, but they're not going to run a custom integration from the banking world into your whatever your flavor, of ERP is. And that makes sense. Banks are not in the business of building complex integrations unless, of course, it's for their own internal systems. And really, what ends up on the enterprise side happening is that they will download flat files. They will run Markov or manual reconciliation on those files, and then they will upload those files into their ERP. But as a result of that, you have a lag between what's going on actually, at the bank and what's going on in your core financials. And there are lots of kind of custom integrations and mechanisms that the enterprise have used to get around it. But really, if you're going to have an integrated answer, and I think we've talked about business process and servicing your customers better. The reconciliation aspects of that, and so what manual reconciliation means and why that can be extremely difficult. I mean, you can imagine if you're running a multitude of different channels, and we talk about modern startups, you've got stuff going on TikTok, you've got stuff going on YouTube, you've got stuff going on right across the landscape where people are trying to make payment. So it's coming in from a whole bunch of different channels into different merchant accounts. You can imagine what the manual processing is to clean that up in an everyday manner. And so what we find in industry in general is that they're running their environment by process rather than by exception. And so providing that, automation or that transactional bridge, if you like, cleans up a lot of that, let's call it payment orchestration or revenue operations, such that finance can now run their environment by exception, which is like super important. So we just deal with the problems. We're not actually just manually having to drive the process. But beyond that, when there are problems with it, and let's talk about that for a second. Digital self-service, on a mobile phone and on a web app, as smart as we like to think we are, users get confused and they make mistakes. They overpay, they underpay, or they don't pay on time, or whatever that anomaly is. And what happens? Well, you'll pick up the phone and call a call center and say, help me with this. Now, for the enterprise, and if we think about the all the lines of business and the stuff that we're talking about, for a finance professional, they now have to, okay, well, what's the product? Oh, it's this product, means it's this line of business, mean it's this processor, and then they'll have to go and reverse out the problems that are going on the processor and get you your refund, and then go into ERP and pull out the transaction and reconcile that particular day. Studies show per account that can be up to 20 hours manual effort. And so your finance professionals, instead of getting on with dealing with exceptions, they're just having to run pure process.
Christopher, you said so much there that it really resonates not only with those who are enterprise that are handling the payments, the processing, support. I think the biggest thing that I'm taking away just from this part of the conversation is that enterprises have multiple areas of payments or service offerings. So you have an e-commerce website, maybe you have a brick and mortar store, maybe you're selling over here, maybe you have hundreds of products, hundreds of services. And the real time reconciliation is a challenge for some because it doesn't really happen. You said like a day plus one, right? So it's not really being reconciled for maybe a day or two later. I see a problem there. And the biggest problem I see is as large enterprises have these outdated systems, ones that haven't been updated for years, ones that are so integrated into their existing systems that it would take years for them to unwind in order to do real time. I got to ask, as an enterprise, what is the value of having a real time payment reconciliation system?
So great question, and the value is really in many different areas. And so one of the things is to say, so before we get to the actual value, because you make a valid point, I've got existing integration. I've got existing structures. I've got existing mechanisms that I don't really want to interfere with because it's going to interfere with my revenue flow, and I don't want to upset that's the most critical part of my business. So how then do I get from where I am today into this real time answer? And really, and that's part of course what we're talking about today in terms of innovation on the cloud and services that we can switch on and off a lot faster without deep, heavy integration that we would suffer from in the past. And so, first of all, is how do I go about that? Second of all, to your point, is what is the value of that? And so, a while back, we started building out. We work a lot in payment operations and understand the pain of our customers in terms of making this end to end. And so a while back, AWS brought out an innovation for SAP, which was their SDK for SAP ABAP, which allowed us to expose SAP and core financial systems to the 200 plus services that are available in AWS, and particularly those services that are really important in terms of payment processing, payment orchestration, and some of the other more sophisticated technologies that we'll talk about in a minute in terms of machine learning and Gen AI and how that deals with fraud. But that innovation allowed us to connect out to the payment processors and sit on the back end such that When an e-commerce transaction takes place, we can enrich that transaction with the metadata, the things that are associated with information pertinent to our business. And that can be things like a general ledger number, a business partner number, inventory, what is the type of good or service that I am buying, what account is this destined to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, why that's important is at the time of transaction, we can then insert that transaction directly into the financial system of record in the appropriate place. Now, what is the value, you ask, in terms of a real-time reconciliation in that space? Well, where do we start? First of all, you have eyes on your revenue position at any point during the day. You're not waiting for T plus one. You're not waiting for T plus two. What does that mean for an organization? It means that your forecasting becomes way more high fidelity. Where are we? We're at the 20th of the month. It's May. We should be at this point revenue wise. We're not. Why not? And the revenue curve this month isn't what it was last month up until literally today. We were expecting a bulk today like we had last year or like we had last month. And our comparative analysis and our predictive analytics become a lot more powerful because we're dealing with real-time data. Beyond that, and the customer service aspects that we've spoken about, and being able to deliver a one-call resolution in terms of customer who calls in with a payment problem, and not having to bog our financial professionals down with dealing with exceptions like that, and really being able to put that out to our customer services representatives and giving them a capability to do that. But moreover, and I think quite importantly, now that we have this real-time view, and we can see what's coming in and what's going out of the organization, we can start to put protections in terms of fraud protection and anomaly protection in terms of a much more robust stature in terms of the way that we're dealing with our accounts receivable, and our accounts payable.
Christopher, I like that you talked about fraud prevention and detection. And the reason that I want to go there is because earlier you were talking about services that were rendered and you want to process the payment. So you go ahead and use your card and you process it. And when you think about that as a consumer, you're thinking it on the low end, right? I, had a plumber in my house and I paid for him and he thinks he got paid. And when he went home, it's processing all of a sudden a day or two later, that card was declined or didn't come through. But if you think about this on large enterprises, it really takes them longer to actually reconcile the reports, the month end that happens. Traditionally, when the month ends, it takes about 2 weeks into the next month in order for them to reconcile the reports from the previous month, and they're already 2 weeks behind. So in those 2 weeks, they're trying to catch up and they're not getting flagged on certain purchases or certain payments or certain invoices that went out. And that's where some of the value would come in with real time, is that you would immediately catch those, not 2, 3, or even months later.
Well, exactly that. And when we talk about fraud, fraud is a big deal in our digital landscape today, and really there's as the bad guys get smarter, we have to get smarter, and it's an ongoing battle backwards and forth, in terms of managing this. But if we take that paradigm and we talk about having a lag of data, or not a real-time eyes on in what our position is, we open the window even further, for the bad guys to get involved. But and to give you an idea on fraud, the Association of Financial Professionals, they published their 2025 report on payments and fraud. I think the number is, yeah, it's a 79% of organizations report either actual or attempted fraud in their landscape, in 2024. That's down 1% from 23, which was 80%. So the needle's not moving much in terms
Not a
of
significant reduction there. Not
not
at all.
not at all. The number one culprit in that space is business email compromise. And so that manifests itself as invoice fraud or vendor impersonation fraud. And so this is typically in the accounts payable world, not so much in the accounts receivable world, but definitely associated with inbound and outbound revenue. And so in ERP payment recon and in our product space, we're capable of running account holder verification, tax number checking, OFAC checking on suppliers that we pay regularly. And so in an instance where we've got a business email compromise, and this is there really is quite a lot of that, we're never going to pay money into a bank account that doesn't belong to the supplier because we've validated that digitally, with third party data. And so in the supplier space, that's super important. In the accounts payable space beyond that, because we're a cloud native solution and because we're utilizing the kind of latest and greatest in terms of machine learning, and AI and agentic AI, we can interrogate a payment file as it leaves the organization to go to the bank to honor to the suppliers that we're going to pay, and we can look through that file and detect what we feel are anomalous or possibly fraudulent payments. And really, in the ERP payment recon space, it stands as a last line of defense between the enterprise, and the bank. Similarly, inbound in the accounts receivable space, fraud detection is super important, and it's super important real time. If let's go back to the example of credit card payments. If a fraudulent payment is made on a merchant, so you bought some product or service with a credit card fraudulently, that results in what we call a chargeback, meaning that the merchant has to eat the money in terms of what is lost because they are ultimately responsible for what went on with that transaction. So if you are not running due diligence on who's paying you and putting some line of defense in between you and the consumer, you can end up one in a manual processing quagmire, so a horrible place where you're having to deal with all of these chargebacks, to a financial implication and liability because of that, especially if you've shipped the good or you've delivered the service, so already. But also, if your fraud rates start to move above kind of 5%, the regulators and the card brands are going to come after you and start asking you questions about your environment's hygiene. And so, even at a basic level, you have to manage this in some kind of automated fashion. But if we go back to real time, if you do not have eyes on it and you let this drift, one, you open that window, a lot larger than it should be. But number two, you're exposing yourself. To risk that you really shouldn't be exposing yourself to at all. So I would say, in the fraud space, there are a number of things that can be put in place immediately that can solve the problem. But as I was saying at the start, as the bad guys get smarter, we have to get smarter. And so those models can't be static. They can't be rules based. They have to evolve over time. And so running a machine learning model against your outbound payments and your inbound payments, which is constantly learning, is going to improve your chances of catching the stuff as you move over a time series, or at least over time. Anything that lives in the static space, really, there are new breaches day by day, and the guys are finding new holes into the environment all the time. And if you're not constantly learning and doing that as a let's call it an automated task rather than a periodic task where we say, oh, we'll update the rules because we're aware of this or that breach, you're too late, and someone's got through the door, or you fraudulently, excuse me, or you've paid somebody that you shouldn't have. So it's a complicated space and it's a dynamic space. But having eyes on in this real time world brings up the opportunities to run stuff through a machine learning model, to have AI interrogate the results of a machine learning model, so that we're really getting to, yeah, we know, the machine learning model will tell us it's fraud, but it won't necessarily tell us why. But now with agentic AI and some of the other technologies that we can deploy, the AI can interrogate the machine learning model and give us good insight as to why this is fraudulent. And of course, all of this information is super useful in terms of hardening our systems, but also, in terms of us having a real-time eyes on in terms of what's going on in our environment, and control from, start to finish in terms of the way that we deploy new technologies and new mechanisms for our clients to pay. One of the most, I suppose, lastly, and really an important thing in that space, if we're going to innovate, and new applications and popular social media channels are popping up all the time that enterprise want to make use of. It's another avenue to their target audience. And so providing a platform where they can innovate fast, so they can make use of these channels quickly, but not compromise their eyes on fraud posture, their real time reconciliation into their ERP, et cetera, giving them a, if you like, a payment orchestration model that's repeatable, regardless of how we want to innovate on what payment channel and what new technologies come out, is super important in terms of remaining a competitive edge, and providing slick and seamless customer services to your end users.
Christopher, here as a consumer, we all have a credit card and we've gotten those alerts. Hey, this might be fraudulent thing. Please text. Hey, would you like to approve this transaction? It stops the transaction. What I'm feeling and hearing from you is doing this real time will prevent some of these fraudulent activities on an enterprise level as a merchant receiving these payments or processing these payments, that you can actually put a stop to these without losing some of the funding to your company, without any of the fraudulent activities that are transpiring today.
That's exactly right. And so there are many point solutions there that are out in the market that are offer fraud protection, and some of them quite sophisticated and are using machine learning, are using
But are they real time? That's the
are they
question.
real time? And
Is it real? No, I can say I am real time, but am I truly real time? Are they using near real time as their real time?
yeah, so one is, are they real time? But I think more importantly, well, not more importantly, equally as important, are they integrated into the entire layer of the payment ecosystem? So every channel touch point, inbound and outbound, have they got eyes on what your if you like, what the patterns look like right across the channels? Have they got eyes on internally into your ERP, and what your suppliers look like, and what your payment velocities look like, and where they're detecting those anomalies integrated into your environment? There are numerous point solutions that offer a kind of near real time type answer, but certainly not to the scale that we're talking about here in terms of a real time payment, payment orchestration, both from the accounts receivable point of view, but also from the accounts payable point of view. I think it's also important to note, it's not just about, obviously we're driving a technology that's bringing efficiency to the organization. It's improving in terms of your fraud posture and your protection of your revenue, inbound and outbound, holistically. But I think also what's quite important is your cost of collection. And so, if we're talking about offering digital goods and services in a self-service manager to our end user, what is the cost of that end to end? And recent studies have shown that even bricks and mortar, so a traditional shop or an over-the-counter mechanism of buying goods, is just as expensive to operate as it is a digital channel in the end-to-end fashion, for the enterprise. And these are important factors to consider when you're building out your landscape as an enterprise, or at least enhancing it, is to say, do we have a repeatable model, whether it's over the counter, whether it's buying something off TikTok, or whether it's an over the phone IVR conversation, or even with a human being. Do we have this repeatable model where it's integrated to our ERP? We've got eyes on from a real-time perspective, and that we can put this protective layer around it in terms of fraud prevention and security, that we are encouraging the flow of legitimate business, and we are making illegitimate business very sticky and difficult to drive through the enterprise.
Christopher, what advice would you give for finance leaders and CIOs looking to modernize their payment processing?
So I would say there are a couple of areas. First of all, I would say from the banking side and the payment processing side, is that optimized? Are you leveraging economies of scale? Are you getting the best deal in terms of just the fees and the processing and the services that you're getting out of that environment? Step one. Mostly out in the wild, we see that that is a scattered set of service providers, all providing different levels of fees, difficult to track, difficult to reconcile. The second part of it, I would say, is, do you have this repeatable model where you can integrate a bank, a payment service provider, whomever it is, into your payment acceptance and outbound payment ecosystem? Do you have a mechanism to do that, such that you've got eyes on your environment, and that you have a repeatable model, regardless which new channel or new innovation that you're going to make use of? When business come to you and say, "Oh, we want to start using this channel. It's hot. It's really in our target demographic," is that, are you acting as a service to business and you've got a repeatable model that you can let them go ahead and do that? Or is it a new t-shirt, a new, custom thing every time we go around that, and makes it slow, makes finance a pain for line of business, and makes line of business feel that finance is a pain in terms of slowing down growth? So really, and certainly talking from an EPI's point of view, clients who are quite serious about revenue operations and payment orchestration, come and have a talk to us. We'll run a landscape assessment. We can talk to all the different points that you and I have been discussing today, and where the dials are in terms of reducing your cost of collection, hardening your fraud stance, reducing the hours of manual processing and error-prone processing, and 2 weeks to close, like you spoke about earlier, and really being able to offer service to business where they can innovate in this space, and gain new ground and new market share, in the digital space.
Where can listeners go to learn more about the ERP payment recon?
Oh, please come and have a look at our website, epiuse.com/payment services. Come and have a look at our cloud services environment. There are some APN blogs available on AWS. And of course, just give us a call directly. We'll be happy to talk to you.
Everybody, today's topic was around real-time reconciliation and fraud prevention, and what is the future of enterprise payment processing. Joining us today was Christopher Belford, the Senior Director at EPI-USE Services for AWS. Christopher, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, John. Pleasure being here.
Well, everybody, this was the Jon Myer Podcast. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and notify, because guess what? We're out of here.